All right, this lecture will deal with a comparative perspective of the peasant in 20th century revolutions, most notably the socialist revolutions, the Marxist-Leninist ones. Um, and as I note, it's more theory from Marx and more reality from Lenin, Lenin being pragmatically on the ground during the Russian Revolution and the subsequent Civil War, which is more important for this talk, which lasted from 1918 to 1921. And then, of course, there is subsequent socialist revolutions in China, being successful in 1949, North Vietnam, victorious in 1954, Cuba, Castro comes to power in 1959, Angola, the MPLA, coming to power, at least semblance parts of the country in 1975. So we have a wide diversity geographically of states in Asia and Africa and Latin America, as well as the European parts of the Russian Empire in 1917. Also, a wide diversity of peoples and cultures, different ethnicities and nationalities. But in all these cases, the role of the peasant was very important because they were a very large portion of the population, and they played a key role in the fighting of the revolutions and consolidation of power of the socialist states. So Karl Marx had initially predicted that socialist revolutions would first occur in the advanced industrialized European states and would be led by the proletariat, the industrial factory workers. So Great Britain and Germany were the two states that he thought would be the first to have such revolutions, and that they would be ones geared towards an industrial, urban existence. In point of fact, the first revolution in the Russian Empire, where 80% of the population is rural, the 20% that is urban is very important because the proletariat do constitute a core of the fighting force, mobilized factory workers, as well as a number of conscripts from the Russian military who defect, although many of them had been conscripted peasants. But they come to power first in urban uprisings in Petrograd and Moscow and other large cities in the center of Russia, and then fight their way out in 1918 and 1921. Most of that fighting in the Civil War on both sides, the Bolsheviks and their numerous enemies, is done by peasants. Uh, but subsequent revolutions, particularly China and North Vietnam, a different strategy, peasants based armies in the countryside that fight their way inward and take the cities last. So instead of fighting outward from the cities to the countryside, as the Bolsheviks do in 1918 to 1921, the Chinese under Mao and the North Vietnamese under Ho Chi Minh and Vo Nguyen Giap fight from the outside in, from the rural areas to the urban areas. And we'll see that this is a response in China to the failure of urban uprisings, particularly the 1927 Shanghai uprising. And later we have the Long March into Yan'an, where Mao establishes a guerrilla base. But China kind of sets a subsequent model, even though it's not the first one to do so. Yugoslavia does this earlier, and they come to power that way. So we look here, Marx's prediction, socialist revolutions theory would be in the industrialized states fails. Instead, they largely take place in agrarian states. Russia, China, North Vietnam, Cuba, Angola. The peasant is turns out to be very important in fighting the revolutions, even in Russia, particularly during the Civil War. Even though we do have a urban core for the Bolshevik Revolution in Russia, which differs from what occurred later in Yugoslavia, China, North Vietnam, Cuba, and Angola. So after seizing power in the central cities, as I said, the Bolsheviks fight their way out, and there is not only is most of the Red Army peasant conscripts, but many of the people fighting against them, particularly the Greens, these peasant uprisings against forced requisition, the largest being in Tambov under Antonov, a former social revolutionary, which was the largest political party in Russia at the time of the revolution. They were a agrarian peasant-based party, but they lost out politically to the Bolsheviks, as did other socialist factions. So, in line with this fact that already by 1918 to 1920, peasants are very important in the Bolshevik Revolution and the Civil War, uh, probably just as important as the urban proletariat, and certainly in other countries like China, more important, arguably due to their overwhelming numbers. There is a rethinking both by Marxist thinkers, people like Mao Zedong, Vo Nguyen Giap in northern Vietnam, as well as later Barrington Moore, who kind of flips Marx on his head, that peasants are very important in revolutions in the 20th century, that they are the main fuel for overthrowing these regimes, but also this has to do with their subsequent policies. So Lenin declares a workers' and peasants' government, not just a workers' government. There is a special place also for peasants in other socialist states, along with the proletariat. They are not considered to be a unimportant class in the new socialist states. And the more agrarian they are at the time of revolution, the more important role they play in the post revolutionary policy. So you see, the peasant question is much more important in a place like China than it is in places in Central Europe, like East Germany or Czechoslovakia, taken over by the Soviets after World War II, that are predominantly urban and industrialized. So that's something to think about, to read about. Kind of the assignment here is to what is the continuing legacy after the socialist revolution of the peasant question, based upon differences in urbanization between socialist states. So in China, it's very apparent. As I already mentioned, the failure of the Shanghai Uprising led to reassessment of the importance of the proletariat versus the peasant in China. And this basic pattern of fighting from the countryside, from the mountains, from the forest, inland to the cities is established, as I said already, in Yugoslavia, where the communists come to power in 45, but makes a really big impression internationally in China in 49. And then this is subsequently followed almost all the other socialist revolutions, Vietnam, Cuba, Angola, Mozambique, where you have this reassessment of the peasant question, this reassessment of the importance of the peasant, and this enshrining of the role of the peasant in socialist states as being an important class, both for the revolution and subsequent revolutionary and socialist policies. So, the differences in socialist construction in a place like East Germany and a place like the People's Republic of China, a lot of it has to do with this agrarian peasant question. And I will leave it at that. So thank you very much, and I hope you enjoyed it.